Ever since the release of World of Warcraft, the Hunter class has had the ability to tame and train many of the beasts that they might encounter around the game world, and on multiple occasions over these almost 20 years, hunters have found ways to tame beasts that Blizzard never intended to be hunter pets. Most of these were patched out and made untamable, but when this happened, the hunters who already had them were usually allowed to keep them unless they were too out of the ordinary. In this video, we will take a closer look at the time when hunters discovered a bug which allowed them to tame some of the most extreme pets the game has ever seen, and also how the community backlash from the way that Blizzard went about fixing this bug might have saved another, very unique unintended pet, which this time hunters were allowed to keep. This is the story of Hatti. When the Legion expansion released in 2016, each class were given access to artifact weapons, which they would be using throughout the entirety of the expansion. Hunter players could choose between 3 weapons, which would then change depending on which spec the hunter was running. Talongclaw was given to survival hunters, who with the start of this expansion would change to fight at melee range alongside their pet, while marksmen got a bow, which they would use at range, often without a pet. Beastmasters received a gun called Titan Strike, which for the first time gave them permanent access to a secondary pet called Hatti, which used a unique version of the Draenor Wolf model with the addition of some lightning effects. What many hunter players don't know is that the version of Hatti we know today was originally meant to use the model of a Northern Wolf instead of the Draenor model. And this was only changed last minute prior to the release of Legion's pre-patch. Lore-wise, it did make sense for Hatti to be a Northern Wolf, as he was one of Titan Watcher Storm's 2 pets, the other being the rare Spirit Beast Skull from the Breath expansion. Putting aside lore accuracy, the idea of having a permanent wolf with a then 8-year-old model in a game world that had been visually updated since the Breath expansion was poorly received by the hunters who had access to the beta test server, and they requested a newer model or at least some way of changing the look of Hatti. To the relief of the hunter community, Blizzard responded positively to both requests, as Hatti was given the much more modern looking Draenor model, and in the hunter class hall called Truesort Lodge, hunters were even offered a quest which rewarded an item called the Essence Swapper that could be used on the hunter's active pet to transform Hatti into a copy of that pet. This effect would then persist even if the original pet was swapped for another, and while nobody knew it yet, this likely rushed item would soon lead to the biggest case of hunter pet exploits. For the first week of the expansion, nothing much happened, and hunters were mainly using the Essence Swapper to clone their favorite pets or trying to find the most fitting combination of different pets. But on the second week of the expansion, Hatti began appearing with permanent visual effects, such as the Allstained Wolf from Northrend, which had been a known visual bug for many years. But unlike the original copy, which would lose the effect in places like the arena, Hatti would keep the appearance permanently no matter where the hunter went. Pets that showed up over the following days gradually became more extreme, as hunters realized that any buffs that changed the visual appearance of their pet could also be permanently copied onto Hatti, even if the visual effect itself had been temporary. And this only became more widespread when a popular YouTube user named Sumio, who mainly created hunter content, released a video titled Tameable Demon, in which he showed how hunters could transform their Hatti into a demon by using the Essence Swapper on their pet while it was under the effect of a spell cast by Burning Blade members, who could be found in a cave in the Durotar zone just to the east of the Orgrimmar city. After learning of this, hunters immediately went to the cave and got a demon of their own, and as a combination of the video's popularity as well as the cave's ease of access being located just beside the Horde's capital city, Azeroth became filled with hunters controlling demon pets, and Blizzard quickly stepped in, fixing the curse so that it could no longer be copied onto Hatti. Having done this, they then tried, somewhat successfully, to track down and reset Hatti from hunters who had already turned him into a demon prior to the hotfix. This slowed down the situation, as many hunters went to the cave, failed to transform Hatti, and then gave up, assuming that the exploit no longer worked. But for those who decided to look further into this, it became clear that it was only the demons in the cave that had actually been fixed, and nearly every other exploit involving transformation of the hunter's pet, such as the Berserker debuff from the Sunken Temple, Curse of the Eye from the Wetland Zone, and many more, still worked in just the same way. While Blizzard were working on a permanent fix for all of these, as well as manually resetting Hatti from players who had been reported, the situation got even worse when players found out that they didn't even need to use their own pet when transforming Hatti, as most NPCs that they controlled qualified as a pet, as long as they had the action bar like that of a pet. This allowed them to transform Hatti into everything from Murlocs, humans, leper gnomes, and the Alliance Bears could even get the dwarf Eric the Swift from the original Alderman dungeon as a permanent pet by using the Essence Swapper while on a quest called Eric the Utility Dwarf, which could be started in the Badlands Zone. While all of this was going on, the hunter community was split between those who wanted to enjoy the fun as long as it lasted, and those who discouraged using the bug, which by this point Blizzard was still actively trying to fix. And especially taking into account that the Essence Swapper item only existed because Blizzard had listened to the request of hunter players. And this good deed was now being punished by the very same community. A few days later, Blizzard finally fixed the bug so that Hatti could no longer be transformed into temporary visual effect or NPCs that weren't actually pets. But by this point, there were already so many hunters running around with Hatti models that didn't look anything like a hunter pet, so rather than slowly finding and resetting them, Blizzard chose to issue a hotfix that reset every single Hatti in the game, regardless of whether they had been using an exploited appearance. While those who had been strongly against abusing the bug, as well as those who had been abusing it as much as possible, like it had been a minigame of its own, were actually understanding that this had to be fixed, the majority of hunter players who didn't read up on forums or consume hunter-related content outside the game itself were also impacted by this hotfix, and some of them had even abandoned the pet that they had copied onto Hatti, thinking that it would last for the remainder of the Legion expansion, which led to some backlash from this part of the community. With a global reset of all Hattis, as well as a fix that made it impossible to permanently transform him into anything but actual pets, the story of Hatti seemed to be over, but this would only last for around half a year, because inside the Druid class hall, called the Emerald Dreamray, there was a beast that used the model of the Draenor wolf pup, and unlike those found in Draenor, this one was actually classified as tameable. The problem was that hunters couldn't access the area, as it required the Dreamwalk spell, which only druids had. Initially, hunters found it cruel that the only tameable version of such a unique pet was deliberately put in a zone that they would never be able to enter. But then they realized that they could use the recruiter fence system to teleport a warlock into the Emerald Dreamway, and the warlock could then summon their hunter. To their surprise, this strategy worked perfectly, and after months of the pup being in the game, hunters had finally found a way to tame them. Unfortunately, not too many hunters ever managed to get them, as it only took a few hours for Blizzard to catch on, both making the pups in the area untameable, and at the same time turning those that had already been tamed into regular wolves. While the very few pups that had been tamed were now gone, some hunters had been one step ahead and immediately transformed Hatti into their pups, which wasn't an issue, as they were actually classified as pets and they didn't make use of any temporary buffs. This spared them from using the pups entirely, and although there was some uncertainty about whether Blizzard would initiate another global reset on Hatti, or just let this one slide as to not upset the hunter community once again, hunters were still prepared to log in any day to see their unique pup be reset to the default Hatti skin. But this day never came, and they would continue to be able to use this very unique lightning pup until Hatti was finally phased out with the release of World of Warcraft's 7th expansion, the Battle for Azeroth.